All right, let's dive in. Apple just dropped a massive set of financial results. And believe me, the numbers are big. But what's the real story they're telling? Well, we're going to unpack their record-setting quarter to find out.
Okay, let's start with the headline number, $94 billion. That's Apple's revenue for just one quarter. And look, this isn't just a big number. It's a brand new all-time record for their June quarter. That's up a huge 10% from last year, and it absolutely smashed expectations.
You don't even have to take my word for it. CEO Tim Cook said it himself. He made it really clear this wasn't just one thing going right. It was, and I'm quoting here, double-digit growth across the board, and, really importantly, all around the world. So what exactly made this quarter such a record breaker? Let's get into the specifics and see what's really powering all this performance.
This chart really puts that growth into perspective, doesn't it? You can just see that huge jump in revenue from this time last year all the way up to that record $94 billion, a 10% increase year over year. I mean, that's just a powerful signal of some serious momentum.
And like Tim Cook said, this was a truly global success story. You can see here it wasn't just the Americas driving the bus. Apple actually grew in every single one of its geographic segments. Even in Greater China, a market where, frankly, a lot of people were expecting a slowdown. In fact, they set revenue records in over 24 countries. Pretty incredible.
So you have to ask, where did all this growth actually come from? Well, the answer is a pretty amazing comeback story for two of Apple's most famous products, the iPhone and the Mac. So this table gives you the raw sales numbers for Apple's 5 main pillars. But, these big totals can sometimes hide the real story. The interesting part, the part that reveals the true growth engines, is when you look at how they've changed since last year.
And boom, here it is. What a contrast, right? Just look at that powerful double-digit growth for the iPhone, up 13%, and the Mac up an even more impressive 15%. This is clearly where the action is. Now, on the other hand, you can see iPad sales were down a bit, but we'll get to why that is in a little bit.
So why the big comeback? Well, according to Apple, it really just boils down to a few key things. First, the iPhone 16 family has been a massive, massive hit. It led to a record number of people upgrading their old phones. And you see the exact same story with the Mac, where the crazy performance of their own custom Apple silicon chips keeps convincing people that, yep, it's time for a new machine.
But, as strong as the hardware story is, Apple's making it crystal clear that its future is about so much more than just the physical device. It's really about the software, the subscriptions, and the intelligence that ties it all together.
Just let this number sink in for a second. $27.4 billion. That's the revenue from Apple Services division. In just 3 months. This isn't just a new record for the June quarter. It is the all-time biggest revenue quarter for services, period.
I mean, the scale of this business is just mind-blowing. Apple now has over 1 billion paid subscriptions across all its platforms. The App Store, their cloud services, even Apple TV Plus, they're all growing like crazy. This thing has become a consistent, high-margin engine of growth for the entire company.
Of course, you absolutely cannot talk about the future of tech these days without talking about AI. And for a while there, everyone was wondering what Apple's strategy was going to be. Well, that picture is finally starting to become pretty clear.
They're calling it Apple Intelligence, and the whole approach is, well, classic Apple. Instead of some standalone chatbot, they're weaving AI all throughout their operating systems. The keywords here are personal, private, and integrated. The goal is to make AI something that's just useful, in the background, without ever compromising your privacy. And you better believe Apple is all in on this. Tim Cook said they are significantly growing their investment here. This quote really shows you just how fundamental they believe AI is going to be, not just for their products, but for, well, everything.
Okay, so far, this has been a story of just incredible success, right? But it's not a completely perfect picture. Apple is also dealing with some pretty significant challenges, both inside its product line and from the global economy. Hey, remember that little dip in iPad sales we saw earlier? Well, here's the context. Sales were down 8%. Yeah, but Apple says that's mainly because last year, in this exact same quarter, they launched brand new iPad Air and Pro models. It's what they call a tough compare. And it's a similar story for their wearables and home category. So it's less about weak demand and more about a tricky launch cycle. But there's a much bigger challenge, one that's totally out of their control. And that is the whole situation with global tariffs, which is starting to have a very real and very large financial impact on the company.
In the quarter they just reported, Apple had to pay about $800 million just in tariff-related costs. That is a direct hit to their profits, an extra cost they had to eat in just the last 3 months alone.
And it's getting worse. For the next quarter, they are forecasting that cost is going to jump to $1.1 billion. So this tariff issue isn't just big, it's getting bigger, and that's a major financial headwind to deal with.
So, we've seen the record highs, the big product comebacks, the massive bet on AI, and those growing headwinds. So let's boil it all down to the key takeaways you should be watching.
If you remember 4 things from all this, make it these. First, core hardware. Your iPhone and Mac, it is booming again. Second, that services division has turned into an absolute juggernaut. Third, Apple Intelligence is the company's huge bet on what's next. And finally, those external challenges, especially tariffs, are a real and growing concern.
So what does Apple itself think is going to happen next? Well, despite all those challenges, they're still guiding for more growth. They're forecasting mid to high single-digit revenue growth for the next quarter, which is a pretty clear sign of confidence.
And all of this brings us to one final thought. For decades, Apple's identity has been wrapped up in iconic hardware. But when you look at the absolute explosion in services and this massive company-wide pivot to Apple Intelligence, you just have to ask, are we watching the exact moment Apple's focus shifts from being about the device in your hand to being about the intelligence that powers your entire life? That's the real question to think about. Thanks for joining us.